Um, Hi everyone. My name is Inkar. I am member of the Astana debate community. I was the third president of Nomad Debate Club, and now I'm living and working in Singapore. I'll be giving today a lecture on trade in Central Asia. So, um, Aigirim, I don't think I have an option to share my screen.
Let me check.
Can you check, please? So we'll be talking about Central Asia as a region which is largely overlooked in a lot of political and economic discussion. But since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative and also the expansion of Russian influence through Eurasian Economic Union and general rise of geopolitics and importance of the region is becoming more recognizable. So that's why we picked this topic as one of the introductory lectures for the Astana Debate Union. Okay, let me try to share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Not yet.
Interesting. 1 second. Okay, sharing now.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, cool. So let's start with the definition of Central Asia because it's one of the key things that we have to understand in this lecture. So for this lecture, we will be talking about 5 stans: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. All these countries are landlocked. But in certain research topics or certain media coverage and certain authors sometimes include Iran, Afghanistan, parts of Russia, parts of Western China and Mongolia also as actually in the definition of Central Asia. So the total population of the region is 72 million, which is not big. The most populous country is Uzbekistan. And then the total GDP is around 300 billion USD. This is actually in current USD, not constant, so that you guys know that this is not adjusted for inflation. And as I mentioned earlier, the region is largely overlooked in the geopolitical discourse. However, with the rise of new projects and new initiatives by the key powers and by the major countries in our region, such as Russia and China, there's more and more discourse on the role of Central Asia actually in the competition between the great powers. So, for your information, all these 5 countries are very different in their economic, political, and social development. But they're also different culturally. So, for example, largely 5 stands would be seen as countries which are very similar culturally and so on. But even language-wise, for example, Tajikistan speaks Persian-based language, while other 4 countries speak Turkic-based language. All 5 countries originated in 1991. They became independent as the result of dissolution of the Soviet Union. Um, However, development paths were completely different for each country. For example, Tajikistan was the country which had a civil war, while Turkmenistan became completely closed countries, which is very hard to visit. And actually, sometimes it's called North Korea of Central Asia. Kyrgyzstan had 2 color revolutions and change of power, and is the only country which is ranked as partly free on Freedom House in the region, while other 4 are ranked as not free with a score of between 6 to 7, where the worst is 7. And Kyrgyzstan is actually the only country which had a female president, the interim president, but she still was in power, Rosa Otunbayeva. So the countries are very different, even though they bother each other, and some of them speak very close languages, and culturally they seem to be similar. So let's do the brief description to the region. This is general overall data. The sources for this data are different, so it ranges from World Bank to IMF and general Wikipedia. So I organized countries in alphabetical order. I didn't put Kazakhstan because I'm first because I'm from Kazakhstan, but so you can see the population and GDP is very different. So, for example, GDP of Kazakhstan is larger than other four countries' GDP combined. You can also see same indication on the HDI index. Clearly, there is a huge difference between Kazakhstan and other four countries. However, when it comes to, for example, major exports, most of the countries export natural resources, and then most of them do not produce like they do not export manufacturing as their major exports. The largest trade partner for almost all five countries is Russia, with trade balance, of course, mostly being negative because Russia exports a lot in these countries, and their economies are very small to compete with Russian exports and export back same amount of goods and services. So trade balance is difference between exports and imports, and you should understand that the trade balance is mostly negative for these countries with Russia. Uzbekistan is the only country which has China as its largest trade partner. I think China overtook in 2017 after Uzbekistan started opening up after the political change that happened in 2016 when the founding father and the first president of the country died, and then they had a new president, and that actually influenced a lot of how the country is going to develop and its general economic course, which we can see these days. I also mentioned the membership in WTO since the topic of this presentation is trade, but I think we should focus on then the column next to WTO, which is Eurasian Economic Union. So you can see that membership currently is with two countries, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. So Kazakhstan is a founding member of EU, while Kyrgyzstan joined around half a year after the general agreement on the EU was signed. Before this, Kazakhstan was part of the customs union along with Belarus and Russia. Later, the EU was also joined by Armenia. So, Tajikistan is seen as a possible candidate. Turkmenistan didn't express any kind of willingness to join the EU, while Uzbekistan is also considered a candidate, and it's been on and off thinking about whether to join or not. So for CSTO membership, you guys, I hope, know what is CSTO. If not, it's fine. It's Collective Security Treaty uh, organization, which is founded by Russia as a response to the NATO agreement. So it's a military alliance between the countries which want to be. So alliance basically gives the countries protection from external intervention by signing treaty with big countries such a big country as Russia, and attack against one CSTO members means attack against all, meaning that other CSTO members will be involved in the conflict in case any other countries get intervened by a third party. So as you can see maybe a trend here that Turkmenistan is not joining any kind of organizations, even regional ones, even the military alliances, since it's trying to maintain its international neutrality. But Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, all of them joined in 1994 when the CSTO was actually founded. Uzbekistan joined in 1994, then it withdrew in 1998, I think, and then they rejoined in 2006 and again withdrew in 2012. So you can also see that there's a clear trend of Uzbekistan not integrating that much within the region of Central Asia, and with Russia mostly, as having its largest trade partner is China. One of the key reasons actually why Uzbekistan is still considering the EU membership, because its trade with China is soaring, along with the Belt and Road Initiative projects. So that's why Uzbekistan is still considering whether to join the EU or not. So, as I mentioned, the region is very diverse. Although for people who don't know about Central Asia, all five stands will be sounding as the same thing, right? But if we go back to the history of each country from 1991 to 2020, where we are now, it will be completely different stories. So, just to give you a brief understanding, Kazakhstan uh, is the richest country because it has enormous resources of oil and gas, which combinedly account for its major exports. But also, the service sector grew a lot in Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan accounts for around 70% of investments for the entire region. So it gains most of the investments from foreign direct investments, and is has been able to host major international events such as Asian Games and Expo 2017. Kyrgyzstan had and Kazakhstan had just recently has entered into a political transition, the so-called era of President Tokayev after President Nazarbayev resigned last year, uh, after serving 30 years in power. Next country is Kyrgyzstan. As I mentioned in the introduction, is a country which had two um, color revolutions. Um, Although many critics they question whether this was actually a color revolution or a clan politics, because there is a huge division between south and north in the country, and this still reflects in how the politics is run. So if you go back to 2005 and 2010 color revolutions and actually analyze how things were happening, mostly the protests were happening in the region which was not in power, and the clan of the region, right? And the overthrows were happening usually by the competing clans. So however, Kyrgyzstan has quite relatively free media and relatively outspoken activism in the country, which is why I think they're ranked as partly free on the Freedom House ranking of civil and political freedoms and liberties in the world. If we come to Tajikistan, it's I think the poorest country in the region, and almost half of its GDP comes from foreign remittances from Russia. In Kyrgyzstan, that number is also quite high, but it's around 40%. So Tajikistan has a lot of migrant laborers who work in Russia, which means its economy depends a lot on remittances and also on Russian policies towards its immigrants. So it's a mountainous country which suffered a civil war, which was damaging and devastating for the country's future years to come after independence. And currently, Imam Ali Rahman and all the political power is concentrated in the hand of one person who is actually appointing his own son as the mayor of Dushanbe, and all and major key positions are actually taken by his relatives and friends. So next country is Turkmenistan, which is actually relatively rich country with a small population. Turkmenistan has the seventh largest resources of gas in the world, but its population is very small, 5.6 million people. It's a very close country, so that's why it's very hard to speak much about this country. But 70% of the territory is desert, and one of the key challenges that the country has is actually um, the water resources crisis. But in general, even though the country, in general terms, its GDP is quite high, and GDP per capita is not bad. It's considered as a higher middle income country, I think. the information about the middle class and all the development sectors is very little. And we know that also for citizens of Turkmenistan, it's very hard to leave the country, even though they want, because mostly they need exit visas, as in many authoritarian dictatorships. It's very hard to get the information from inside the country. Uzbekistan is a very interesting country for me, and personally, I think it's going to be the fastest growing economy in Central Asia in the coming 5 years. Until 2016, Uzbekistan was completely closed. Its economy was not liberalized. But after the death of first president, when Shavkat Mirziyoyev took over, he started liberalizing the country in both economic and political terms. The political liberalization is still questioned, but um, but um, Igrim, I think I'm getting messages that some members cannot hear me.
I think I can hear you well. Does anyone
Okay,
else have that problem?
okay. No one else has, right?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So with the political and economic liberalization, Uzbekistan has become actually a center of attention in Central Asia, especially for China's Belt and Road Initiative and projects around that is going to launch in Central Asia. Uzbekistan is the most populated country in Central Asia with a relatively young population, which means they have a necessary workforce for the projects that are going to be launched in the future. So many economists and analysts actually predict that Uzbekistan will be growing at very high rates with the opening up. However, we don't know what's going to be the future, considering the recent developments and pandemic in which we're all living. So you can also see the major exports. In case of Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, it's gas and oil, metals and other things. One key thing which I want to underline here is Uzbekistan's major export, which is cotton, because this could be actually the green ticket to high economic growth levels, considering the global demand for cotton, which mostly comes from China, which is the biggest producer of clothes and textile. So despite the increasing labor costs in China, China still expresses a lot of interest and demand for Uzbek cotton, which is a way for Uzbekistan also to establish its own production facilities, probably with its young and relatively ambitious workforce. So that's the brief description of the region. Now I want to talk about the major challenges. So in general, we understand that when we discuss the region in terms of trade, being landlocked is a challenge because you won't enjoy that much of the connectivity through sea, which is considered the relatively cheapest and fastest way to deliver goods and services these days. So the region is landlocked, and that's why it's quite an issue for the countries, because they are not able to reach other regions, and it's quite challenging to do so. Next thing is Aral Sea disaster, which I want to highlight because while the region is landlocked, there are two major lakes, two big lakes, which are called actually sea, Aral Sea and Caspian Sea, and one of them is shrinking at a very high rate, which is making it very challenging for the ecology, for the entire biodiversity and other things. So after actually Central Asian states became independent, there were attempts to reverse the crisis. The crisis started um, with the policy of the Soviet Union to divert two major rivers feeding the sea for pastures, irrigation, and construction of large canals. So that resulted of Aral Sea being the fourth largest lake in the world in 1950s to losing 90% of its size by 2014. So there were attempts to revert the crisis, and because the crisis resulted in general destruction of biodiversity, rise of respiratory diseases, cancer types, it also doubled the mortality rates in the region. So the long-term effects were really bad because of the dust of clouds, of salt and industrial chemicals that were once dissolved in the sea. So the attempts to reverse the crisis were actually taken by two countries. So because the sea has generally been divided into two parts by the shrinking, it's north and south. So north is Kazakhstani side and south is Uzbekistani side. Hello? Guys, you can hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Okay, cool. So you can still see my PPT, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So to reverse the crisis, the countries actually also took different responses. So, for example, Kazakhstan got a World Bank loan and built a dam to regulate the flow from north to south basin and redirected half of Sirdarya to flow back to the sea. Sirdarya is one of the two rivers which was redirected from the sea, and this resulted actually in the first in the increased water levels for the first time in the crisis history, and the country was also planting friendly desert-friendly saxaul trees, which helped to lessen the impact of the dust clouds. Uzbekistan's response was different. The major obstacle was that the country is dependent on export of cotton. As I mentioned, cotton is a huge thing for the country. So Amu Darya, the other river, which was actually used to feed the Aral Sea, is actually nowadays used for agriculture and mass production of cotton and wheats, so rice and maize, which are also necessary products for Uzbekistan's economy. So and the country wasn't able to respond to the environmental damage because of its economic dependence on these resources, and diversification of the economy was another challenge back then. And I mean, it illustrates the crucial necessity of long-term calculation actually in and being economically flexible to manage this kind of disasters. So the next thing is water vs energy crisis, which is very important also because so if we go back to understanding the like landlockedness of the country, it's important to understand that also when the country is landlocked and it doesn't have access to sea, it's and there are also the regions which are mountainous in the of the region, and so Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are the upstream countries, and Uzbekistan and um, what is it? Kazakhstan are downstream countries, and the problem with in this case is actually that this results in so Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they use actually water from which is flowing down from the mountainous regions on theirs as also a source of energy. So they build water dams, for example, or they build energy stations, but that diverts certain water which actually is to be arrived in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, which means that the countries may suffer from water shortage. That's why they have to regulate and negotiate these things as upstream and downstream countries. And that gets even more complicated because um, because of the relationship that the countries have. So generally, say even if Kazakhstan doesn't have the issues with the countries, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan had the issues since the Tajik civil war, when Uzbekistan interfered in that, and they still have the border disputes. Same with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan having border disputes, while Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan have ethnic tensions over what happened in 1990 in the city of Osh, and then also the ethnic killings that happened in 2010 during the color revolution in the same city of Osh. So the initial conflict actually comes from the Soviet daemons, because like previously it was mitigated by Moscow. So Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, right? They're oil and gas rich countries, which can actually, like back then, they could have provided cheap energy for Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, because everyone was belonging to the same country. Everyone was part of the Soviet Union, and Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan would get cheap energy from the other countries. One second, I think there's an issue with the presentation again. Application window. Can you see now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Still can see, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So previously, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan could have provided cheap energy to these countries. However, after they all gained independence in 1991, sovereign interests would prevail over the interests of other neighbors, right? And you will also have a competing demands. So Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan started selling their energy abroad as their major exports to raise certain revenue, leaving Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan with little or no energy and power for months. So actually, there will be a lot of blackouts in these countries, because they were deprived from the major sources of, like, cheap sources of energy such as coal, gas, and oil, and they're critical during severe winters. And considering our continental climate, it's quite challenging. That's why they decided to build hydropowers to satisfy their basic energy needs for their populations. But these decisions now have a pernicious impact on downstream countries, because this caused the deficit of steady water supply, which is actually critical for, I mean, common human use and agriculture and crop production. And considering that there is also global climate change going on, and summers are hot and dry, and this all is actually also exacerbated in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan by the Aral Sea crisis in the regions where they grow their crops. This results in a lot of challenges and contradictions between the countries. So the issue is still urgent, but the countries were not able to come to a strategic decision for this issue, for this challenge. And this actually shows how disintegrated the region is, and a necessity in the third party mediation again. So as I mentioned, in the years of the Soviet rule, these all issues were mitigated by Moscow. And considering the last attempts of uh, of the interstate coordination, um, I mean, they were even launching Water Resources Commission and international funds to save RLC, and doing like round tables and so on. The countries were still not able to come to certain decision and actually a solution of the crisis. So this means that they may still need an external mitigation from major powers in the region, such as Russia or China, uh, to mitigate the situation and to uh, bring countries closer to the solution. Um, Next thing, which I briefly mentioned, actually the ethnic tensions in the region. So they're mostly so first, like first couple which has clashes is Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, which had the clashes started during Tajik civil war between 1992 and 1997. when Uzbekistan sends certain troops, but they were not able to align with any sides of the civil war, and actually it also resulted in a lot of refugees of the war running back from Tajikistan to Uzbekistan. And the other couple is Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, which has border issues, um, which I think are closer to the solution, but still are not solved. And the third couple is Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, which has issues over Uzbek population which lives in Kyrgyzstan, because there are often the ethnic clashes happening within the country, within Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan responding to that, such as a founding nation, like a nation state for Uzbek population. So these are also the challenges for the region to come closer in terms of political and economic alliance, and even in terms of trade. So next issue is human rights. As I mentioned in the beginning, that the entire region has not have the good records of human rights in general, and the countries have political suppressions of civil liberties of the populations. But I think we'll try to focus on economic challenges more in this presentation. Foreign debt is the next thing, which also actually prevents countries from engaging with each other in trade closely. So, for example, if you go and analyze the foreign debt of Kyrgyzstan, 40% of which is owned by China, the issue with the growing foreign debt increases the possibility that the countries are not able to fulfill their duties within certain economic uh, unions. That's why it also, in general, the countries have misunderstandings in and gaps in whatever economic opportunities they could come from. Next is corruption, and final is general disintegration. So corruption is a huge, I think, inheritance from the Soviet Union for the region. Any in like if you go back to the corruption index, perception index CPI in the world, all these countries will be below hundreds place out of 180 countries. So and this issue is a huge challenge for the country still to develop economically and to integrate economically as well. Now we will be stopping for the Eurasian Economic Union and the influence of major great power in the region, which is Russia. So Eurasian Economic Union was established as the result of the customs union, which was previously held between Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Later, they started developing into a bigger union, which has its purpose of organizing free flow of goods, services, capital, and people for the entire region. So the date which it starts is actually January 1st, 2015, and in general, it's seen as a uh, competitive union to the EU, European Union. Since it was also established, like the Eurasian Economic Union went more deeper in terms of economic integration than the customs union, because it wasn't just about goods, but also services, capital, and people. So it's seen as largely as Russia's response to the Western sanctions after Crimea crisis in 2014, in March of 2014. Eurasian Economic Union provides a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges for its members. It's actively negotiating free trade agreements with East and Southeast Asia. In fact, the latest trade agreement which was signed with Vietnam. So free trade agreements have their own benefits because they allow the countries to access I mean, it depends on HS codes of the goods. So HS codes are actually codes which are assigned to every good. But depending on which goods you are signing the free trade agreement for, it eases a lot the flow of goods and sometimes services for the countries in between. So free trade agreement, for example, which was signed with Vietnam, it doesn't allow free flow of people and capital with Vietnam. However, the goods and services are included in the FTA, and it isn't the FTA's free trade agreement is not just about taxes. It's not about actually taxes. It's not just about customs. So the difference between customs and taxes is that customs you pay when you export things, taxes you pay anyway, because you are selling goods, right? So customs you pay only when you cross the border. So FTAs usually allow customs free flow of goods, which leads to lower costs for the producers, meaning that the general cost of the product also goes down, and then it becomes more accessible for the customers, for the consumers. They signed this kind of FTA with Vietnam, and there's one also negotiated with Singapore, and then larger negotiation happening with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. So those are 10 countries in Southeast Asia which have the this kind of like economic union as the Eurasian Economic Union has. So FTAs allow customs free trade. That's one. But two is that they allow also faster flow of goods in terms of custom clearance. In general, also all the processes are more simplified. For example, some of them allow e-stamping as general, like you don't have to go through a lot of bureaucratic processes and so on. So this kind of FTAs is actually a major, like actively negotiating this kind of FTAs is actually one of the key strategies of the Eurasian Economic Union, because it will allow East and Southeast Asian countries to access huge market of the EU, which is around 108, more than 180 million people. So that's why it's seen as a huge opportunity. Some analysts have actually predicted that EU will help smaller countries to grow as well. However, there are also a lot of challenges for the countries, because Russia's role in the EU is huge. It accounts, it is actually the major trading partner for every other member of the EU. It accounts for most of the exports, and the trade balance with Russia among other four members is negative. So other four members are Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Belarus. And this results actually in a lot of contradictions along how actually the policies within the union are built, the way they're later implemented. So one of the key, for example, things that Eurasian Economic Union wants to achieve is a monetary union. So introduction of the common currency. It was suggested to be named Altın, which means gold from Kazakh or Turkic. I guess in Kyrgyz it also means gold. So monetary union has a lot of potential in terms of unifying monetary policies and helping the countries to regulate their macroeconomic policies as well. However, the challenge is also that the disproportionately big market of Russia may actually result in harms for other countries because of the flow of exports and services and capital in general from Russia to them, and them not being able to compete with Russian goods. Their local markets could get harmed a lot. So the next thing is that Eurasian Economic Union is trying to link its projects to China's Belt and Road Initiative projects. So, for example, one of the key infrastructure projects, which is Trans-Siberian Railway, is also built to connect to make Central Asian countries better connected to Russia and China as well, so that Russia and China can also trade more through these links. And finally, one of the key aspects of Eurasian Economic Union is whether it's a political or economic union or not. So the most recent meeting which the heads of governments had, they had it via Zoom, by the way, showed how actually different the expectations between the countries are. So Kazakhstan's president, for example, spoke up a lot about how the country wants to maintain it as economic union, purely economic union, while the Eurasian Economic Union's Commission was recommending, for example, aligning legal codex or like criminal codex and all these kind of laws and things. So that for countries such as Kazakhstan, is actually a loss of certain level of sovereignty. That's why they want to keep the union purely economic, while of course Russia has its own ambitions to keep Central Asia as its own backyard and to expand the Eurasian Economic Union further to other countries. But actually, membership was also discussed beyond Central Asia. I mean, beyond the five stans that we're discussing, it was also offered to countries such as Iran or Turkey. Of course, it wasn't offered. It was not offered to China, but still, it has close ties with China. So these are the major things to consider when we think about Eurasian Economic Union and the Central Asian countries trading within it. The next is China and a role of Belt and Road Initiative, which I want to talk about. So I divided this information into two because I think with the rise of China as a global superpower and also as a economic powerhouse, and the launching of the BRI, which actually was announced in Kazakhstan in 2013, Xi Jinping's formal visit to Astana and to Nazarbayev University. BRI was seen like there were a lot of different opinions on BRI and what it's going to result. So, of course, the country sees as a potential in of attracting a lot of investment in infrastructure, which will result in better logistics and connectivity to the global value chains. So it will be a cheaper and faster route to transfer goods and services, probably. The one of the good things that ex-president of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, mentioned is that loans that China provides in the framework of BRI are formally free of political conditionality, while in comparison, for example, with the other IGOs, international government organizations such as IMF and World Bank, when you get loans, they have certain political conditionality or economic conditionality, which results in that countries have to adapt certain institutional changes to meet the criteria for those loans or to actually being able to continue to take those loans. So, of course, the countries which are run by the authoritarian rulers would see loans for which are free of political conditionality as a benefit. However, why I underlined it's formally free, because we understand that behind doors it still influences a lot in the internal politics of the country which is taking these loans. So the other thing which countries are hoping to benefit with the BRI projects is actually transfer of technology and expertise, which comes with training of the local labor by the Chinese companies, which come and install their projects locally. And this will also is claimed to increase the jobs. So, for example, in Kazakhstan, you have instituted quota for local workforce for the BRI projects, which is 70%. This is, of course, actually also a political response of the countries to the growing xenophobia and Chinese economic and political expansion in the region, which I'm going to talk now. So the other side of the Belt and Road and China's expansion in the region is that it's increasingly leading to huge xenophobia, which is fear of Chinese invasion, actually. So this results, for example, in 2016 in Kazakhstan, there were land protests against the lease of land for 25 years for foreigners. And recently there were also protests last year in Kyrgyzstan for the Chinese companies mining the gold thing in the territory of Kyrgyzstan. And usually the xenophobic protests and the calls are aligned with labor dispatch, because the countries believe that a lot of Chinese workers will be coming over, taking over their jobs, or Chinese will be coming over and they're usually paid more than the local workforce. And demographic disbalance plays a huge role in this stance because China has a fifth of the world population, and as you see, in the largest country in this region is Uzbekistan, which is 33 million people, which is like easily 2 cities in China. So the raw materials extraction, which actually takes place in the framework of BRI, is also seen as actually going back to the needle of dependence on natural resources such as oil and gas and metals and gold and other things in different countries. So they don't see this actually as an opportunity to grow, but going back to the same resource course, which results in over-reliance on export of these resources. So another issue is actually what is happening in Xinjiang with the so-called re-education camps, where a lot of ethnic Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic-speaking nations are locked up, and there's a huge public outrage on the issues of these ethnic minorities in countries such as Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, because they actually account for um, the population who actually may miss their relatives in these camps. So that's also an issue. Plus, higher coverage of this issue in media and in critical social media posts and everything also raises this issue. Finally, two things that I want also to mention is that related to trade mostly in here, that even though you still produce in the BRI project, even though you, for example, have the connectivity and logistics uh, supplied better for you, the problem might be that the goods which are transferred through these new rails which are built are usually high value and low volume, um, because they're more profitable to transfer by land in this case. And they're actually inaccessible for populations with lower purchasing power parity, which makes no sense then to transfer them through the territory. I've explained this better in the case study, which will start on the next slide. Now, just finalizing this slide is that the countries are actually also very scared of the public debt spiral, and loans accompanied by Chinese contractors, as I mentioned, resulting in labor dispatch. And they're also scared of tough market competition for domestic products, because actually one of the key reasons China is seeing Central Asia as a trade partner in BRI is that because it wants its own landlocked regions such as Xinjiang to develop while competing with Central Asian countries. So if, for example, Xinjiang say will be developing its exports highly, so Central Asian countries will have to compete with the exports which are coming from Xinjiang, which is going to be tough because they have lower production costs, better productivity. In general, they have better Chinese already established industries and manufacturing and all the people who can actually run all these industries. So that's why for countries in Central Asia, this might be another challenge. I want to talk about the case study of Horgos, because I think when we talk about Belt and Road Initiative and trade in Central Asia, it's one of the key projects, and it's one of the case studies which I think deserves attention. So Horgos is a dry port which is located between Kazakhstan and China, and it's actually also accompanied by a special economic zone on the border between these two countries. So as Central Asia is actually seen as a special component in the land-based component of the BRI, which is Silk Road Economics Belt, Horgos is one of the key projects on this Silk Road Economic Belt. So the special economic zone, which is established between the two countries, 65% of its territory belongs to China and 35% belongs to Kazakhstan. And the special economic zone allows for people to come there and trade without any kind of customs and So basically, to have a free trade. There's also a city which has been built around the special economic zone, Nurkent, which is so the total area of Horgos is around 130 hectares, and the city is built to actually provide, I mean, certain living space for people who work in Horgos and who work in the special economic zone of Horgos. So rail freights, which come through Horgos, are considered very cost efficient because they're estimated to be around 2 times faster than ships and much cheaper than air transportation. So one of the researchers on the supply chain efficiency in Central Asia, conducted by the World Bank, stated that the train routes are actually winners instead of in terms of speed and per kilometer cost in Eurasia. So, for example, if we go back to the presentation and then we look at the estimates for shipping from Southeast Asia to Europe, you can see that there are like origin cities. And keep in mind the discussion that we had about the Eurasian Economic Union and the free trade agreements that they already signed with Vietnam, and the other one which is to be signed with Singapore. All this and the negotiations which are happening with ASEAN, and then you can see that Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, these are all country members of ASEAN. So if you deliver goods from these cities to the destinations in Europe, so say Rotterdam, Warsaw, Paris, London, and others, the average time by ship is around 30 days, while time by train via Horgos is estimated to be around 15 days, so 2 weeks. So it's actually twice faster than it happens to deliver those goods through ship by ship, right? So actually, how the things happen is in Horgos you have the change of rail freights, so they arrive on certain rail freights um, from China, and then they're changed to the local, which then go up to Europe, and then so the the entire project bypasses through the territory of Kazakhstan, but actually the major destination for this logistics project is actually Europe. So China is building and investing in making Horgos a very efficient and popular dry port to reach fast the European markets. So and if you analyze this, it seems that actually Horgos has a lot of potential to turn into a dry port, which has an enormous potential to provide this transshipment center. And in the long run, it can actually potentially compete with the world's biggest logistics and transshipment centers, and is predicted to handle up to 30 million tons of rail freight a year. But what remains unclear is that whether this the Horgos project will be able to carry this kind of potential, because there was a case of Hambantota project in Sri Lanka, which actually resulted in certain failure, let's say. So nowadays, Horgos is experiencing already the challenges. So the growth rate of handled freight actually dropped from 113% in 2017 to 44% in 2018. So in 1 year, it was more than 60% decline. Furthermore, after more than 5 years of operation, its annual shipping is still equal to what small Chinese ports can handle in months. So actually, it's whatever Horgos handles in a year is actually still handled within a month in small Chinese ports. But we are keeping in mind that Horgos is a dry port, and the problem with the special economic zone is also that it's actually not turning into a very attractive special economic zone between these two countries, but mostly is seen as a wholesale market for cheap Chinese goods, like when because Kazakhstani site doesn't look very impressive, and there are very few business buildings, restaurants, and souvenir shops, and there's nothing more than that. and Kazakhstan doesn't have a competitive advantage within that special economic zone that could actually boost its side and help it to be more attractive for the Chinese buyers who are coming to the special economic zone. So it also needs an industrial development to ensure like the entire centrality of Horgos and the regional trade, because the development that has been taken so far, the city that's been built around the dry port is not well populated, and it doesn't attract that much of the trade going on through the region. And although Kazakhstan has made certain steps to ensure simplified, for example, employment procedures for foreign nationals, and also investing, allowing investing companies to enjoy tax-free regime and free land lease until 2035. So hopefully these measures will result in certain improvements, and this kind of industrial development will help Horgos to build, for example, warehouses and factories that will develop logistics and manufacturing, like the port of Duisburg, which is mentioned here. In Germany, it's also one of the most popular dry ports in the world. So there's a lot of questions whether Horgos will be able to turn into a BRI success story, but it's one of the key projects that certainly both China and Kazakhstan are accounting for, and hopefully it will provide better access for Central Asian countries to to global supply chains, and everyone will be benefiting from this. So on this note, I think this actually the case study of Horgos explains well how the projects within the BRI are done. Even though there's a lot of ambitious hope and money coming from China, the way the projects are handled and the way then they're implemented and managed further on the governance level are also challenging. So we can clearly see how the political governance in general and local governance in the regions where the projects are handled and implemented uh, makes a very big role in whether the projects are able to succeed or not. So I hope that this makes it more clear how the BRI projects could have a huge potential, which is better to be realized with better governance and institutions. So the next union actually that the next trading partner that I want, so we went through major trading partners, Russia and China, and now I want to stop on European Union because it's also a very important trading partner for the region. It accounts for around third of external trade. Although it's not the key trading partner, each country actually has one or two European countries that is major trading partners after Russia and China in whatever exports and imports. And so Central Asian countries mostly export crude oil, gas, and metals, and other kind of natural resources to the European Union countries, while EU exports mainly machinery, transport, equipment, and other manufactured goods. So with the European Union, it's quite interesting to analyze the trade relations because, as I mentioned, because of the different economic backgrounds that countries have, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, they actually have access to the EU market through generalized scheme of preferences, which is given to, let's say, poor countries. So Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan do not have this access because they're considered upper middle income economies. So while Kyrgyzstan actually also have this generalized scheme of preferences plus scheme, which grants additional preferences in terms of accessing the EU market. But still, we can see that even though these kind of opportunities are given for these economies to run and to trade with the EU, the major source of trade for them and the major source of export remains the natural resources, and the countries were not able still to come with their competitive advantages that they are able to sell to the EU. So the EU adopted the new Central Asian strategy in 2019, major overall institutional framework is that they want to have a partnership agreements with every other Central Asian countries. So those have to be bilateral trade relations. So they have that kind of partnership and cooperation agreement with Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And with Kazakhstan, they went even deeper because they were able to sign the enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement in 2015. And later, Kazakhstan ratified it, and it actually entered in force in March of 2020. So it's EU is also trying, as they see geostrategic importance of the region, as because they connect to China through the region gives access to the countries such as Afghanistan, and also is a connectivity point to the Middle East. EU has its own agenda to have the bilateral relations with every country in Central Asia, and that's why they're trying to in the trade picture they're still trying to maintain their roles and trade those commodities that they could, and actually try to integrate more economically in terms of trade with the countries. But I mean, there are different standards, of course, for the trade. So EU's technical regulations, sanitary measurements and requirements, protection of intellectual property rights, customs issues are completely different. The standards are completely different from what the countries in Central Asia can afford. So that's why it didn't result in much of the trade growth, although the countries are still trying to maintain balanced and good relationships. And this actually results in the keeping the status quo of EU importing machinery and transport equipment and manufacturing in Central Asia, while Central Asia exporting natural resources mostly, which they heavily rely on in their export markets. So the EU also has a role in calling out the Central Asian countries for their democratic changes. OECD, which most of the EU countries are member of, also produces reports on the political elections, on the situation in the countries. The embassies are quite big in all countries, I think, except Turkmenistan. So that's why the energy sector of Central Asia actually is quite big for the EU, and it's actually also very big for China. But the way the EU is trying to establish the trade relations with the region is very different from what Russia and China are envisioning. So in case of Russia, it's an economic union plus the military alliance, which allows, and of course the geographical presence in the region of the country, shared history, shared culture, and shared history of being actually part of the same country. So Russia has its own stance, plus each country has a considerable Russian population, Russian speaking and ethnic Russian population, which allows Russia to maintain its presence in the region, not just in terms of trade and economic ties, but also politically. For China, it's completely different ambitions. So China is trying to use the region as a buckle in its Belt and Road initiative, because Central Asia is actually a key access point for China to get to Europe through very fast and cheap modes of transportation, such as rail freights. And the way China is approaching the trade policies in the region is actually by investing a lot and creating this kind of opportunities and hopes and ambitious projects in the region, which we can see in the example of Horgos, are not resulting in a very cohesively implemented projects, which are becoming the success stories of BRI. And they're all like, some of them are criticized, some of them are still having hopes, and it's very different from country to country. While in case of European Union, the Union is still trying to maintain bilateral relations with each country and not approaching the region as an entire region. But still, the effort that the EU is putting into the economic and trade integration with the region cannot be seen as excessive, because what they're trying to maintain is good bilateral relationship, trade that has been there for years already, but not going beyond that much. Because as even we can see, the new Central Asian strategy, which was adopted, it doesn't come with many new initiatives for the region. Although the EU may provide certain foreign aid to the poorer countries and the projects, and the access to, the scheme of preferences that they're providing to these poorer countries, the countries are actually not able to use these schemes because they cannot maintain those kind of standards that the EU is maintaining generally within its own member states. So the three approaches to trade with the region are completely different, and actually the responses of the countries to each of the major powers are also very different. As we can see from the latest trends, Uzbekistan is getting very close with China in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative projects, and in general enhancing trade, opening up economies to each other, and having more Chinese tourists in the country, because Uzbekistan is generally considered as the cradle of the Central Asian culture and history. It has all the key major cities which have a lot of history and culture, and in the recent years there has been a lot of increase of Chinese tourism in the country. Plus, there was the establishment of two Confucian schools in Tashkent, in the capital city, which help the younger people to learn Mandarin and to be able to study in China and then come back to country and act actually those as those cultural bridge between their own people and Chinese people. While Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, especially Kyrgyzstan, we can see huge hostility towards Chinese projects, especially in Kyrgyzstan, where protests are not just empty words, but they can actually still achieve certain political goals. As one of the recent protests resulted in Chinese companies leaving the country and closing mining the mines where they were doing their job to extract gold on the gold mines. So in Kazakhstan, I would say that approach to China is quite cautious. On the government level, the government is still trying to maintain good bilateral relations because it's important to balance geopolitical ambitions of the countries. And on the one hand, on the other hand, it's also a very important trading partner. But the country is still open to foreign investments from the EU and Russia to balance through the influence of these countries. So with Tajikistan, it's more complicated because they are not able to turn off from Russia as Uzbekistan, for example, could, because 50% of their GDP is remittances which come from Russia. But with the COVID, of course, the situation will be changing, but it won't be changing in more positive way in terms of more Tajik people returning home but still not having jobs, and a lot of these people are actually young. And considering that Tajikistan also borders Afghanistan and there's a lot of drug trafficking, and there is a terrorist flow through the borders which are in the mountainous region, it's quite a dangerous stance for the country to have high levels of unemployment, low levels of economic growth, and having those sets of fire on the borderland. So I mean, in case of Turkmenistan, it's very hard to tell anything about the country's policies because the country has been closed mostly. They they trade in terms of oil and gas and their natural resources, and they do trading like very basic, but they do not join economic alliances, they do not join political alliances or anything. They try to stay neutral and everything, and it's very hard to speak on actually countries' response and stance to this kind of geopolitical conditions happening around. So yeah, that's the end of this lecture. I hope it was useful, and I just want to end it with this lecture was quite serious, like even the tones, the color tones that I chose were like black and white. So I decided to end it with some kind of fun fact about each country in case you don't know things about Central Asia. So a fun fact about Kazakhstan is that actually apple tree originates in the area around Kazakhstan's ex-capital city of Almaty. So if you know Kazakh, Alma Ata is actually Almaty is actually names Alma means apple and Ata means tree. So it's actually the grandfather city of apples. Um, the fun fact about Kyrgyzstan, which I also didn't know before I googled this, is actually that 70% of country's territory is comprised of mountain regions, and in total there are 88 major mountain ranges. I recommend you to go there and see them because they're stunning. I've been to Kyrgyzstan 4 or 5 times, and it's very beautiful. So the next fun fact is about Tajikistan. Apparently, Tajikistan hosts the world's longest glacier outside the polar regions. So this glacier is located in Yazgulem Range in the Pamir Mountains. It's called Fechinka Glacier, and it's covers an area of around 700 square kilometers and extends almost for the distance of 77 kilometers. So it's quite huge. The next thing is Darvaza gas crater in Turkmenistan. If you Google it, you will see the pictures of something which looks like a hell on Earth. It's which it burns continually in the middle of desert in Turkmenistan, and apparently it's not a nature-made grace crater. It was actually a human-made mistake. So there was a kind of Soviet geologists drilling Turkmenistan's land in 1971 for natural gas, and they made certain mistakes which resulted in that gas crater. If you ever manage to go to Turkmenistan, I'm not saying you if you go, but I'm saying if you manage to go, because it's really hard to get there, to get visa and approval and to go there. If you ever go there, if you visit the Darvaza gas crater, just keep in mind that it's not heaven given. It's made by people. And the last one is about Uzbekistan. Apparently, Uzbekistan is one of the two double landlocked countries in the world. So second one is Liechtenstein, and the first one is Uzbekistan. So it's actually quite a fun fact for me because I didn't know that there is a phenomenon of actually being double landlocked, meaning that to get to the sea, you actually have to cross at least two countries. So that means being double landlocked. Yeah. So that is the end of this presentation. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. Aigirim, if there are any questions from YouTube, maybe?
So there was one question, but it's redacted now, so I can't see it.
It's what?
It says it's retracted. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna wait for 4 more minutes. I will share the PPT with Aigirim, and please keep it to yourself. Try to not share it too much. Although I don't think it has anything sensitive. Should be fine. So, Aigirim, can we wrap up?
Yeah, I can stop the stream now.